Hey everyone, welcome back to here at Apologetics. I'm super pumped to join us today to have Apologetics Squared, and we're going to be breaking down the argument from Psychophysical Harmony. So, Squared, what's up, man? How are you?
Hello, I'm doing adequate. How about you?
Adequate. I feel like that's something like when I ask people how they are, I never really hear adequate. But
I'm
I'm pretty
trying to
good. I'm
I'm trying to bring it into style. If more people should say adequate when asked how are you.
what the cool kids do. So I'm psyched for today. I'm really excited to look at the argument from Psychophysical Harmony because like podcasts like this are slowly helping me to get my mind around it. You asked me before, like how comfortable am I with it, and I'm like, not really, but like I
Mhm.
can get the gist of it and stuff like that. So yeah, Squared, what do you want to say about this before we get rolling?
Well, my general attitude for this argument is like, okay, you could think of like the Kalam or maybe moral arguments, like they're a nudge towards theism, and then you have other arguments that push against, and you kind of got to balance them out to see where you land. But the argument from psychophysical harmony, if it works, it is way stronger than it has any right to be. It would just kind of completely blows every other argument out of the water in terms of its strength, as far as I could tell right now. So my general attitude towards this is like, hey, we've popularized, like the Christian apologetics community, we've popularized really complicated arguments before, like the modal ontological argument. So we got to start focusing on popularizing this one, because like if it fails, we need to figure out how it fails and like go from there. But if it succeeds, then like, I mean, do we need other arguments? It's pretty powerful. Like, have I mentioned that it's powerful? Yeah, I think I mentioned that.
Yeah,
So that's
that's
kind of
kind
where
of
I
the
stand.
vibe I've gotten from like
Yeah.
Psychophysical Harmony is like people are like, well, the objections here, they're not really that good. And like there's an argument here, but for a lot of people, like it's really hard to get their mind exactly like what is the argument. Um, yeah, that's that. So where do you want to start this off, Squared?
Do you want to start sharing my screen or sharing the
Yeah,
window?
sure. Here it
Okay,
is.
yeah. Yeah, this is probably like the first, oh, here, wave. Huzzah. This is me kind of unveiling this for the first time. Uh, in a, over the course of a couple of days, I coded up this like little animation studio for me to present things. So let's see how this goes. But yes, the mediocre apologists return. Me and Zach, this time with psychophysical harmony. Um, Side note, I'm counting this as a continuation of the mediocre apologist series, because I think this argument from psychophysical harmony replaces the fine tuning argument. So yeah. Anyways,
Hmm.
where I want to start is, hold on, going to take some time for me to walk over there.
Slowly wait. Which is interesting. I love how you talked about how it kind of like is like replacing the fine tuning argument because we did a big long stream with a lot of slides about the fine tuning argument as we build
Yes.
into Psychophysical Harmony.
And James Fedor talked about the electrons in love objection to the fine tuning argument. And like that was on my list of things to like look into, but I didn't really like grasp how powerful it was. But basically, the argument from electrons in love is like, hey, you can't run the fine tuning argument until you take into account psychophysical laws. And the argument from psychophysical harmony is like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's take into account psychophysical laws. Um, so, anyways, where I want to start is how this argument works. Is the baseline epistemology for this at the most fundamental level is that if we want to like give evidence for a theory, we have to find verified predictions of your theory. Your theory predicts something, then you find that thing out in the world. Your prediction is verified. Okay, that's evidence for your theory. And we've covered this previously, that theism's predictions are good things. Okay, so that's the starting point. The the next step is that when we talk about predictions, we're talking probabilistically. We're speaking probabilistically. So if I say that my theory predicts X, that means that the probability that you would find X if my theory were true is high. So if my theory were true, the probability of X would be high. That's the same as saying my theory predicts X. All pretty standard Bayesian argument stuff so far. Yeah. Now, here's where things get a little bit harder to wrap your head around. When we talk about like probabilistic reasoning, you're usually thinking about stuff like the flip of a coin or the roll of a dice, right? But there are other scenarios where you could talk about probability as well, probabilistic reasoning. And we have gone over this in when we talked about fine-tuning arguments, but I'm going to go over it again. For example, the digits of pi or water is H2O. These are things that have to be the way they are, okay? So it sounds kind of weird to talk about reasoning probabilistically about these things, but I think we can. For example, Zach, do you know what the billionth digit of pi is?
4.
Really? You know that?
Oh yeah, I'm just guessing.
Oh, you're guessing. Okay. Well, what's the probability that you think that your guess is correct? Now, you might think that... Oh, go.
I mean, I was going to say 1 in 10.
Right.
Would be right.
Yes, I think that's the correct way of thinking about this. You might think that... you might say, the probability is either 100% because it's necessitated by mathematics, or it's 0% because some other digit is necessitated by mathematics. But until we actually look it up or calculate it, we don't know what the probability is. And that's, I think, I understand what that sort of reasoning is getting at, but I think it's also valid to say, hey, every digit is equally as probable as far as I'm concerned. As far as I can tell, any digit is just as probable as any other digit. So the probability, as far as I'm concerned, is 1 in 10. And this isn't the same kind of probability as what we're talking about with coin flips and dice rolls, arguably. This is what would be called epistemic probability. It's probability that's concerned about an agent's judgments or the confidence of an agent in some proposition. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you're like, what you're saying is like, we could look at like things that are necessary and like still like say that like there's still like a chance. Like there's some probability here that like we could reason with. So we're not just gonna say like, oh, it's just necessary. God exists or God doesn't exist. Like obviously one of those is the case in the same way that like the millionth digit of pi, like, or the billionth digit, like there is some sort of necessary explanation, but we can still like say like, hey, there's a 1 in 10 chance it's 4, before we kind of like examine things.
Yes, there's other scenarios where this, yes, that's right. There's other scenarios where this pops up as well, like in science, like what we could think about the statement water is H2O. Now, I'm very confident of this fact. I think that my epistemic probability in this is roughly 100%. Like I assign a probability of roughly 100% that water is H2O. However, this wasn't always the case, right? Scientists had to actually like discover this. So there was once upon a time, if you gave a scientist the statement water is H2O, they'd either not understand it or they would assign a low probability to it because there had yet to be any experiments to verify it. But then after experiments showed like, hey, we could break up water into 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen and stuff like that. Okay, well then the probability that they would assign to that proposition goes up. So this is actually kind of just like a common sense sort of reasoning, even though the water is H2O, right? It like the actual probability of this fact is 100%. Or you might say the metaphysical probability of this is 100%, but our epistemic the epistemic probability that we assign to it would be less than 100%, very small prior to experimentation, and then it shoots up really quickly when we do some experiments that verify this.
So you can have epistemic credences that are like less than 1 and like leaning towards something even about like necessary truths, with the probability of them actually occurring in the world is 1.
Yes. Yeah, that sort of thing happens all the time. So basically, this is the thing that you need to be really comfortable with for the argument from psychophysical harmony to make sense. You have to be really comfortable for talking about the probabilities of things that actually had to be the way they are, or things that we just don't really understand the nature of them. Maybe like, what would be a good analogy? Maybe somebody doesn't realize that they're not like big into mathematics, so they don't understand that the digits of pi are necessary. They don't understand how the digits of pi actually follow from the axioms of mathematics. So that it's all kind of just vague and mysterious to them. Well, they can still say the probability that the billionth digit of pi is 1 in, or that it's 4 is 1 in 10. So what I'm trying to get at there is that might be necessity, or it might just be mysterious, right? And that's another time when epistemic probabilities come into play. Necessity or mystery, and like basically where we can't see the answer.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Okay. I'm just going to keep walking at my somewhat slow pace. So now that we're talking, now that you're hopefully comfortable with epistemic probabilities, I'm going to ask you about a particular fact. This particular fact is that when C fibers fire in somebody's brain, they feel pain. That is the fact I want to ask you. What's the epistemic probability of that? Zach, what do you think?
So what is the epistemic probability that like when C fibers fire, like that's going to cause pain? And I'm guessing C fibers, those are the things that like are like triggered when like you have some sort of harmful act.
I'm not actually a neurologist, but yes, the C fibers are like, we verified this through experimentation. When C fibers fire, people feel pain. So actually, it was a trick question. The epistemic probability is actually 100%. We have verified this through experimentation. So I gave you a bit of a trick question. But the actual question I should have asked is, prior to experimentation, what should have the epistemic probability be? So like before anyone did any neuroscience, before anyone ever opened up a brain, if you showed them a picture of a C fiber and asked them, hey, what's the probability that this is like when this thing fires, you'll have the phenomenal experience of pain, what probability should we assign to that? Now, I want to clarify something. Some people take pain to mean like a certain behavior, like avoidance behavior. That's not what I mean by pain here. By pain, I mean like the phenomenal experience, the first person subjective experience, or the qualia. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. That the physical thing of C fibers here would be connected with the mental thing of pain. Okay, what's the probability of that? Now you might think, there's all these different theories out there in the philosophy of mind, like substance dualism, physicalism, identity, or property dualism, blah 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 blah, panpsychism, idealism, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to have to get into all these theories in the philosophy of mind before I could answer your question squared. That's what you might be thinking. Zach, are you thinking that?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that, like, I'm thinking about C fibers, and it's like, well, how are different theories in the mind going to explain, like, why C fibers cause the explanation of, like, us having pain?
Yes. Now, the thing is, these different theories of the mind don't actually affect the answer to my question at all. If you have a physicalist, substance dualist, and an idealist all in a room, like people with radically different theories of how the physical world interacts with the mental world. Like one person thinks we have souls, another person thinks that we're just physical bodies, another person thinks that everything is consciousness, and blah, 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 blah. Whatever view they hold, that won't actually help them to realize that C fibers are connected with pain. Like, it won't. They can't just sit on a armchair and reason, well, everything is fundamentally consciousness, therefore a nerve with this particular molecular structure is going to be connected with pain. No, they can't reason like that. A physicalist can't reason like that. A substance dualist can't reason like that. Nothing would really tell them in their philosophy of mind theory about, or it wouldn't tell them anything that would lead them to believe that C fibers are connected with pain rather than some other experience, like, say, pleasure. Like, to actually figure out what C fibers firing makes you experience, you would actually have to, like, go out and do an experiment to figure that out. Does that make sense? So it turns out your theory, like whatever view you hold in the philosophy of mind, is pretty much irrelevant to this argument, which is huge. Like, this argument has so few commitments. So does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe. Do you want to explain a little bit more? Because I think one barrier here is that people like I think about like people that aren't Christian, like maybe like the atheist listeners who lean to some sort of like physicalism. We're gonna say like, well, let's look at the case of like the pain, like causing like the brain state of like feeling pain. Like you stub your toe, that's harmful for you. It's like, of course, then that would cause like some sort of state of like you feeling pain because you want to avoid that behavior. Like, why is that not a problem for this argument to just like agree with everything that you're saying that the physicalist would say there?
So I think so where do I want to take this? So first off, one thing I want to clarify that I don't think I made very clear is that we're talking about the probability that C fibers are connected with pain rather than any other mental experience like pleasure or the taste of cherries or the smell of sawdust. So that's one thing I want to clarify. The other thing is that I want to focus on the specific physical structure of C fibers, and I want to talk about the probability that an agent would assign to it prior to actually seeing that when the C fibers fire, you feel pain. You might think of that. We want to make the a priori assessment of this. So we haven't actually done any like we're thinking before we've done actual experiments to show that when you stub your toe and damage your body and and C fibers fire, you feel pain. No, we're just talking about before we've seen any of that. We're just like sitting on our armchair reasoning about philosophy, and then somebody shows us a picture of a C fiber and says, "Hey, what experience is associated with this?" Now, that question won't be affected by your philosophy of mind. Like, there's nothing in physicalism and nothing that in idealism, nothing in any of these theories that say talks about carbon atoms or the structure of nerves or anything like that. So your view in the philosophy of mind won't affect your probability assessment of this fact.
Okay, that's helpful. You're saying, hey, let's take a giant step backwards here and like just think about the picture of like a C fiber, like just a C fiber there.
Yes.
What is the probability that C fiber is going to be affiliated with the mental state of pain?
Yeah, or we're focusing on C fibers, but like you could do other things like a dopamine receptor being connected with pleasure or associated with pleasure or whatever word you want to use. Any physical structure and the associated mental state or experience.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
So now hold on, I have to walk over because I forgot what my next slide is.
We got to keep all these like clever transitions in mind. So I love this walking guy. We can keep the walking guy like words to say as the walking guy keeps walking to the next slide. I love this touch. I love it though. I really do love it.
Thank you. I should probably speed him up though. Oh shoot, I forgot to. Oh yeah. So here's I wrote this here. Big question: how probable is the connection between C fibers and pain? I forgot I put it on this slide, but yes, this is the big question. Now my little diagram in the left here, I put that there because the argument's going to work slightly differently if you're an epiphenomenalist. If you think that the physical causes the mental, but not vice versa. Versus if you're like more of a substance dualist type view, if you think the physical causes things to happen in the mental world and the mental causes things in the physical world, that's going to change the structure of the argument slightly. So keep that in the back of your head. Anyways, on we go with an amazing transition dialogue. So, and this is how I think that we could answer the question of what's the probability that C fibers would be connected with pain. Well, we could answer this question roughly in the same way we would answer the digits of pi question. So you might think that, hey, there are roughly 10 possible digits as far as I'm concerned about what the billionth digit of pi could be, 0 through 9. So 10 options, probabilities 1 in 10. Okay, I think that's a reasonable answer. Well, C fibers, before we actually do any experiments, as far as we can tell, C fibers could be connected to the experience of pain, could be connected to the experience of happiness, could be connected to the experience of tasting cherries, could be connected to the experience of smelling cheese. By the way, when I say experiences here, I'm using that in place of the word qualia, because like in my mind, qualia is like one of those like overly philosophical terms. Like I think most people like use the word experience when philosophers mean qualia, but that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Anyways, on the flip side, what the experience of pain could be connected with? Well, there's a lot of options for physical things that it could be connected to as well. So like it could be connected to dopamine receptors. It could be connected to mitochondria or water molecules. I don't know. I mean, before doing any experiments, like we have no reason to rule out these kind of weird answers down here as either. So I think that the probability that C fibers would be connected to specifically pain like this is going to be astronomically low. Each of these lists that we have as options for like the connection are massive lists. They're on the left here, we have all epistemically possible like physical structures. And on the right here, we have all epistemically possible mental experiences. Having a connection between specifically C fibers and pain is going to be super duper improbable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we're looking at like C fibers here, and we're saying like, just going back to this example, and obviously there's other ones like you talked about here, like you've done your slide, like you have dopamine receptors and whatnot, and saying like, well, like C fibers can be correlated with a lot of things like pain or happiness or a cherry taste or a cheese smell, or like all these other things, and that's kind of like the phenomena that we're examining here.
Yes. Like there are 10 options for what the billionth digit of pi could be. So the probability of any one answer is 1 in 10. In roughly the same way, to give a ballpark estimate, the probability that C fibers would be connected with specifically pain, the probability of that is going to be like 1 in the number of total, like the total number of epistemically possible experiences or quality.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's going to be a massive denominator. So like the probability is going to be really small.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on. I hope you love the walking animation.
I do. I really do.
Oh yes, there's going to be a further something I want to keep you. There's going to be another thing I want you to keep in the back of your head. If you're like a substance dualist like me, you might think that there's a second question here. So not only do C fibers cause pain, but you might also think that pain like causes avoidance behavior somehow. Maybe I don't know, maybe it causes the C fibers to heat up or get a higher voltage or blah, 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 something physical that actually in your body leads to avoidance behavior. Some physical effect that causes avoidance behavior. Does that make sense? So then you would have like 2 sets of connections.
Okay, so we have the connection of the C fibers are causing the phenomena of pain, and like that when we phenomenally like experience pain, that's going to give us like that avoidance behavior of like we don't like that. So
yes, like you might think like, hey, you're doing some dumb game where you're seeing how long you could hold your hand close to a flame. So like there's some conscious decision here, choosing to move, keep your hand there. And you might think that the mental experience of pain is actually like causing your behavior of moving away eventually. You might think that. An epiphenomenalist, somebody who's like a physicalist or an epiphenomenalist, they won't think that we have this second connection here. There's just this the physical things causing the mental experiences of pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense?
Yeah. So you're looking at like 2 different connections here, like the C fibers and like causing the pain, and there's a question there, and then the pain causes the avoidance, and there could be a question there.
Yeah, and like the second one's optional because you might not be an epiphenomenalist. So I want to like emphasize this argument can work pretty much no matter what your views are in the philosophy of mind. So I'm just like saying, hey, you might have the second optional set of connections here. You might not. Okay, moving on.
Quite literally moving on because your guy keeps on moving.
So now I want you to consider a weird scenario. So I want you to consider a scenario where C fibers are actually connected to pleasure. So when you like stub your toe or something, you feel a jolt of pleasure. And dopamine receptors are actually connected to pain. So whenever you do something that normally give you a dopamine hit, it actually gives you a jolt of pain. If you're an epiphenomenalist, like you imagine this scenario. So I'm walking along, and I stub my toe, and I get a jolt of pleasure. Well, all the physical processes are the same, so I do the exact same thing, as I would if pain was associated with C fibers. I'd, try and nurse my toe, make sure it's healthy and all that, and try and get essentially try to get whatever nerves are firing to stop firing, because it's very unpleasant. Except no, it wouldn't be unpleasant in this scenario. It'd be very pleasant. It would be very pleasurable. I'm worried that I went through that a little fast and it was hard to follow me.
So I think you're saying like, hey, let's like imagine this weird scenario where you're walking down the street, you stub your toe,
Yep.
instead of feeling a lot of pain, you feel a lot of pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if epiphenomenalism is true, so we're ignoring this optional second set of connections here. If there's just epiphenomenalism, that is, if the physical world like causes experiences, but the experiences are like a fifth wheel that doesn't interact with the world at all, then after you stub your toe, then whether or not C fibers produce pleasure, whether they produce pain, no matter what they produce, the same thing is going to happen. You're going to bend down, try and nurse your toe, make sure it's not broken, and all that sort of things. And whether or not it caused pain or it caused pleasure, because same things are happening physically. Your brain's being completely run by physical processes. Your body's being completely run by physical processes. So the physical world is going to look the same. And this is kind of weird, right? Because there's a total mismatch of what's going on in your mind and what's going on in the physical world. But notice this set of connections here, C fibers being connected to pleasure and dopamine receptors being connected to pain, that's going to be just as probable prior to actually going out into the world and doing experience, a priori, that is to say a priori, that's going to be just as probable a priori as the normal one, C fibers being connected to pain and dopamine receptors being connected to pleasure. They're going to be equally probable. So you might, you're already starting to see this problem. If you're an epiphenomenalist, then the fact that we get pain when we damage our bodies is just as likely for us to have gotten pleasure as when we damage our bodies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm tracking with you here. So like what you're trying to do in framing the argument is say like, hey, like start with like mere C fibers or mere dopamine receptors. Like a priori, like we have no reason to think that, like one would cause pain and one would cause pleasure. So we have this big problem of here, like why did C fibers then end up with lining up with pain, and why did dopamine receptors like wind up ending up with pleasure? When it seems like just epistemically it could have been the other way around.
Yeah, and now the naturalists might say, well, hold on, I'm a substance dualist, which they probably wouldn't say because most naturalists are not substance dualists. But maybe they would. They'd say, hold on, I'm a substance dualist. And I think that pain causes avoidance behavior and pleasure causes, like, I don't know, maybe like repetitive behavior, like some sort of reward-like behavior. Okay. And then, so I could give a story that evolution would actually select for whatever happens to cause pain to be the thing that fires, so to speak, when I damage my body, because evolution would want that because it'd be survival promoting for me to avoid whatever behaviors give me pain. They could get, something along those lines. But the problem is that there's a priori the probability that pain would be linked to whatever physical effect is correlated with avoidance behavior. The probability of that is going to be really low because there's a lot of things that pain could be connected to. And it seems that pain could just as easily have been, or the physical effects that the experiences of pain and pleasure could have, they could just be swapped, and that would be equally probable. So the probability that you would have, the substance dualist type view here isn't in any better standing, because it's still a really low probability that we would have something that gives us the correct effect. Like we could run the same thought experiment where you feel pleasure, but the pleasure is linked to avoidance behavior, and it has some contribution to you nursing your toe and making sure it's not broken. And you have, I don't know, a delicious apple, and that gives you a dopamine hit. Again, I'm not a neurologist, so I don't know how accurate the neurology is. That gives you a dopamine hit, and that gives you lots of pain, and you're like, I want to do this again, and you eat more tasty apples, something like that. So there is, a priori, there's going to be I have these two scenarios that are going to be equally probable before doing experimentation, whether you're a physicalist or whether you're a dualist, where you have some behavior that is completely wrong mentally, but physically is going to be exactly the same. So from an evolutionary standpoint, or whatever standpoint you want to give it, it's not going, there's no reason why we should expect one rather than the other. Does that make sense? You tracking with me?
Yeah, we're kind of going to this idea of like there's no reason that like C fibers should line up with like pain compared to like pleasure or like smell or something like that.
Yes. The experiences being something that makes sense is going to be just as probable as the experiences being something that doesn't make sense a priori. So now we're going to generalize the argument, because we were just talking about C fibers and dopamine receptors and pain and pleasure. But like, our brains happen to have a couple more things in there than that. So let's generalize this argument to all connections between all epistemically possible physical structures and all epistemically possible experiences. Oh, what a mouthful. So you see all over here in the top left, we have what represents our normal or the actual psychophysical laws that we actually have. And over here in the top right, we have another set of psychophysical laws that's going to be just as likely as the first one, but it's chaotic because all the connections have been switched around. And in fact, almost every way you could switch around the connections is going to lead to something chaotic that doesn't give you a coherent mental experience of reality. Like, it would just be completely mismatched of what's actually going on around you. Now, when Dustin Crummett talks about psychophysical harmony, he lists like specific kinds of psychophysical harmony, like pain and pleasure being correctly associated with each other, and semantic psychophysical harmony, and all these sorts of things. I think that he's kind of, it's kind of a weird way of putting it. It's like it's almost as if you like threw a bunch of random graphite onto a paper, and it like makes a perfect picture of the Mona Lisa, and you're pointing out like, hey, there are some eyes, and also there's a hairline, and also all this stuff. Like, yes, that's all true, but like, it's weird that it just made a picture of anything at all that's like coherent and stuff. That's kind of more what you're getting at, because you would expect random noise. So what I think that the naturalist should expect, like, if hopefully the analogy is going to make sense, what the naturalist should expect is just completely random noise, like the mental experiences that a naturalist should expect a priori before they do any experiments. And I guess I have to use experiments really broadly to mean any sort of experience of the world at all. What the naturalist should expect before any experience of the world at all is just going to be some sort of completely chaotic experience, where like C fibers are going to be something random, like the smell of grass, and then dopamine receptors will be the taste of, I don't know, a sour taste, and just so on and so forth down the list, so that as they just go up day, their mind is just pure chaos experientially. That's what the naturalist should expect, right?
So the naturalist should expect that, like, given naturalism, like brain states or like physical experiences should just like kind of like randomly like line up with like different, like causing different mental experiences. And the reason that they should expect this is because, like, just given like a priori, there's no reason that like one physical state should cause some specific mental state.
Yeah, like when you sit and think about this, it's kind of weird, because we're reasoning about literally the most obvious facts that we've ever come in contact with. Like, namely, we just have a coherent experience of reality. We don't have static, like our experiences aren't just static noise.
Yeah.
But like, that's actually super surprising, since we have like these experiences are being given to us via a brain, and like that's going to be translated through these psychophysical laws. By the way, I haven't actually defined a psychophysical law yet. The psychophysical law just would be something like, hey, when C fibers fire, you experience pain. That's what a psychophysical law would be. Anyways, so now I want to talk about the strength of the argument. That's what this thing here is. Because every dot is going to represent like one set of psychophysical laws. The picture I hear of on the left as like the physical world being inputs and the mental world being outputs. Every dot represents a way of like drawing out the arrows to connect the inputs to the outputs. And I think a good estimate of how many dots there are is going to be 2 to the power of B, which means like the number of brain states. I used to refer to them as brain states. I started calling them physical structures. Anyways, that's why it's B here in this presentation. Anyway, 2 times B, the number of physical brain states, physical structures, times the number of mental states or experiences or qualia. The way I derive this figure is that the number of relations between 2 sets, A and B, is going to be 2 to the power of A times B. So that's kind of where I pulled this figure from. And that's going to be a massive figure. Actually, B is itself just insanely massive. The number of epistemically possible brain states. So that's like physical structures that prior to experimentation could conceivably be the thing in a brain giving experiences before we actually like look into the world and see what's actually parts of brains and giving us experiences. So this would include like physical structures that don't even obey our laws of physics. So like that would be a massive number. And mental states, that's like all experiences that could conceivably be had by a creature. Like we as humans have like an insanely wide range and variety of experiences, each of which is completely unlike any other experience. Like our smell is completely unlike color, and color is completely unlike taste, and we have just so many experiences like this. But like we're just humans. Presumably, other creatures like bats or fish or so on and so forth, they have other senses and other completely different kinds of experiences than we do. Like the number of epistemically possible mental experiences is going to be huge. So like the number of epistemically possible sets of psychophysical laws is going to be insanely huge. So the probability of getting one that is going that actually has a sort of harmony between it, or a harmony between the physical and the mental, is going to be, well, the number of epistemically possible sets of psychophysical laws where harmony occurs divided by this massive number. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you. So you're looking at like brain states. Okay,
can I interject real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So say like you had some red jelly beans in a jar, and you want to talk about like what's the probability that I get a red jelly bean? Well, it's the number of red jelly beans divided by the number of other jelly beans, right? So, not the number of other jelly beans. It's the number of red jelly beans divided by the total number of jelly beans. So if there's like 1,000 jelly beans and 10 are red, then the probability of getting a red jelly bean is 1 in 100. So what I'm trying to do here is tell you how many jelly beans there are. It's this number here, 2 to the power of B times N. It's a huge, huge number. So unless that numerator is going to be insanely huge as well, then the probability that we would get this sort of psychophysical harmony between physical and mental states is going to be insanely low. But as we showed just from the simple thought experiment with stubbing the toe, like it's actually super fragile. Psychophysical harmony is insanely fragile. If we swapped out the experiences of just a couple physical states, it would kind of completely destroy a coherent experience of reality. So it's actually going to be a tiny number divided by this insanely massive number. Makes sense?
Yeah, because what you're trying to do is like look at like all the different like brain states that are possible, and then timing that by like all the possible mental states that can be correlated with all those like physical states.
Oh, sorry. I hope this diagram illustrates like what the talking about is the number of ways of correlating physical with mental. So
Okay.
the number of different like combinations of arrows.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly arrows because, presumably one physical state might correspond to a bunch of different mental states or
Yeah.
no mental states. So I have to tweak the math to reflect that. But that's how I get this number here. Does that make sense now?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So that's we're almost done the argument. So the probability that you would get the psychophysical harmony, that you get like a coherent experience of the world at all, given naturalism, is going to be roughly 1 divided by 2 to the power of b times m. Now, it's not actually going to be 1 divided by that number. It might be actually a relatively large number, like maybe they're like a Google different set of Google different psychophysical laws. I can speak. Hold on. In Google, the number of aesthetically possible psychophysical laws that produce psychophysical harmony might be a Google, and so insanely big. But we're dividing it by something that's insanely massive compared to that. So like we're dividing it by, say, a Googleplex. So the numerator doesn't really matter. We could basically just ignore it. Like it's still going to be like 0.9999999 times a Googleplex. It doesn't really affect it much. We could practically ignore the numerator, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're just saying that like 1 over something is going to give you like this like really 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 small number.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me. Here's another analogy I came up with when I was discussing this with somebody else. Let's say you have monkeys at a typewriter, and you want to like just generating random text, and you want to talk about the probability that they would come up with a work of Shakespeare, or not, maybe not a work of Shakespeare, just something coherent, something readable. And you'd be like, well, the letters are coming at random, so it'd be like 1 in the number of different combinations of letters. So there are 26 letters, so 1 in 26 to the power of the length of the book that they're writing. So that's roughly an estimate on how probable it is that these monkeys at the typewriters would produce a coherent book. And you might counter that by saying, well, it's not 1 in that because there's like so many different books of that length. Let's say it's 10,000 letters long. I don't know how many pages that would be, but like it's a 10,000 letter long book. It's not going to be 1 in 26 to the power of 10,000. It's going to be like a huge number of books divided by 26 to the 10,000. And it's like, okay, fine. But the denominator there, 26 to the 10,000, is just going to eat up that numerator so much that it might as well be 1 in 26 to the 10,000. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Okay, so basically, psychophysical laws, it's going to be super improbable that we get ones that make sense.
Yeah.
It's roughly 1 divided by the number of total psychophysical laws that we could get. And now you might say, hold on, the numerator there is not going to be 1. It's going to be much bigger. That's analogous to, hey, say I have a monkeys at a typewriter typing out a bunch of like 10,000 letters, and I want to know what's the probability that they would write a coherent story. And I say, well, they'd have to get every letter correct, and that's 1 in 26 to the power of 10,000. So really small. You might object, well, no, it's not 1 in 26 to the power of 10,000 because it's not just one story that they might be able to write. There might be like billions of stories that they could write that we would all deem coherent. Okay, so it's several billion divided by 26 to the power of 10,000. It's still roughly the same number. It's going to be like within, like, as far as we're concerned, it's going to be the same thing. Really, really small.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
This is okay. I'm worried. Okay, we should probably move on because this is a really esoteric point that I'm spending a lot of time on. Basically, basically, what I'm saying is like the probability of getting the specific digit of pi, say 4, is going to be 1 divided by 10 because there are 10 different possible digits as far as we can see. And the probability of getting psychophysical harmony is going to be like basically, if you're a naturalist, the probability you should assign to getting a non-chaotic experience of reality is going to be 1 divided by the total number of different ways of matching up brain states to physical, or brain states to mental states, physical states to mental states. And that's going to be 1 and 2 to the power of the number of brain states times the number of mental states. And it's going to be, the denominator here is insanely huge. And so 1 divided by that insanely huge denominator is basically 0. It might as well be 0.
Mhm.
I don't usually say that because, well, no, even if it's 1 in a million, that is actually like a number worth taking seriously. This isn't worth taking seriously. It's basically 0. Now on theism, okay, I can't just say like, hey, this is a prediction that theism, or sorry, I can't just say that, hey, naturalism fails to predict this. I have to say naturalism fails to predict this, but theism correctly predicts this. So how would I say, hey, theism correctly predicts this? Well, on theism, the probability that you would get psychophysical harmony is going to be super duper high. Why is it going to be super duper high? Well, because on theism, God would want to give us psychophysical harmony. Psychophysical harmony is a good thing. The ability to have a coherent experience of reality. Not only that, is that it seems to be like a prerequisite for almost any good a creature can experience. Like if I want to have a true loving relationship, or if I want to have knowledge, or yada, 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 if I want to have any of these goods, I mean, I need a coherent experience of reality. I need to like be able to call memories to mind that make sense. And I need to be able to like have a visual perception that is coherent, to be able to see my friends and loved ones and so on and so forth. Like if we had just a incoherent noise as our experiences, we could have barely any goods that are attainable by creatures. So like it's very, very high given like the probability is very, very high given theism that we would have psychophysical harmony. So now if what this means is that theism does very well in predicting what we see, that we have like the grabbing a jelly bean from a huge pot of jelly beans, that analogy doesn't work because basically on theism, you have an agent who's like trying to find a red jelly bean. Naturalism, the jelly bean is just being picked at random. So the probability of it being red is super duper improbable. And because the stat is insanely big, like the fact that we actually have a red jelly bean is very, very large evidence for theism and against naturalism. So,
okay, yeah, I think that's pretty clear.
Yep, that's the gist of the argument. And now I have this thing over here that says, what is the second word? Suspense. The E-N. Oh, it says the end. There we go. That is the end of this argument. Yes. So, ta-da!
Woo! We did it.
Now, Zach, you felt like you didn't have a solid grasp of the argument beforehand. Where do you think your grasp of it is now?
I think it's better. It was helpful looking at like when you talked about the distinction between like brain states and mental states, and looking at like what is like a physical harmony all about. And what you're trying to say is like we're looking at it and saying like, hey, we have the existence of like these brain states here. And we also have the existence of these mental states. And it's like, why on earth are these brain states lined up with the mental states? And like that's the big mystery that psychophysical harmony and this argument's trying to explain, and saying like, hey, theism is gonna do a lot better job than atheism.
Yes.
Or naturalism.
Yeah. And it doesn't work as well against like theism adjacent hypotheses. Like basically this argument works for anything that's like theism, and it works really poorly for anything that's like naturalism. So there have been some prominent I'd call them naturalists who have changed, like who have updated their worldviews based on this argument, like Emerson, Green, and Philip Goff. Or is it Goff? I can't remember. Anyways,
who knows?
Yeah, they've like included in their worldview something like theism, maybe there's just a fundamental tendency towards the good. Like, remember, theism managed to handle this data really well because God wants to bring about good things, and psychophysical harmony is a good thing. So that's why theism predicts this data very well. Well, the naturalists might want to just like add in that there's a tendency towards the good that isn't God. It's not God, but is the tendency towards the good somehow in some way. So that might be how, you know, a naturalist would deal with this argument, you know, which is a step in the right direction. But like having a sort of like indifference towards psychophysical laws in your worldview is just, you know, I don't see how you could have that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd love to get through a couple things I was thinking about, Squared, and like you're by no means like the poster boy for this argument, but I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on them. And one thing that I kind of thought about was like one of the things, like it seemed to me the argument assumes is like almost like there's this realm of like physical like states, like looking at like brain states, like and like C fibers and all these things. And then there's also this realm of like mental states, like pain and pleasure and happiness and sadness.
And some people don't believe in those realms, right?
Yeah. So, and like, what if someone's like, hey, like, well, why think this mental realm exists in the first place? Like, just taking a step back here, like, why think all these things just exist in some sense and are waiting to be correlated with some brain states by like these magical pixie dust wielding psychophysical laws?
Yes. This is why I love the argument so much. It doesn't have to exist. There could mental reality, like, sorry, mental experiences don't have to exist. Qualia don't have to exist. This argument still goes through. Why? Well, okay. Because there is, in some sense, there is pain that we conceptualize differently from C fibers, right? Our understanding of C fibers and our understanding of pain is different, right? And like, I mean, obviously that's true because there's a time, like we all know what pain is without studying neuroscience, but we have to like actually study neuroscience to understand what C fibers are. So like they're conceptually different, right?
Like pain and C fibers are conceptually different. Okay, yeah, yeah, fair.
Okay, so that's all that we really need to have, like to be able to like start to judge epistemic probabilities. Like the like what's the epistemic probability that water is H2O? I'm going to return to that one. Water is H2O. They're not any different. Like there isn't a realm of molecules and a realm of substances, and water inhabits the realm of substances, and molecules inhabit, or H2O inhabits the realm of molecules, and they just happen to be connected between these two realms. No, they're the same thing. They're just the same thing. But we could still do epistemic probability about, like we could still assign epistemic probabilities to this fact. So when we talk about like what's the probability that C fibers are pain, they don't have to be different. They could be literally the same thing conceptualized two different ways. We could still do all the same probabilistic reasoning in this argument. It doesn't change a thing. So like this argument assumes so very little about the philosophy of mind. It's just like baseline, like very basic observations, like, hey, stubbing my toe hurts, and hey, I have a coherent experience of reality. It doesn't need much more than that.
Do you think that like the argument for psychophysical harmony, do you think that there's like the possibility of like wondering like why think that, so obviously like in this world we live in, like C fibers cause pain or like are correlated with pain, but I'm wondering if like what if someone would say that like maybe in a different world, like see maybe something else, like what was the, see, I'm not a neuro person at all, so what was the thing that you talked about that causes so something causes dopamine states cause pleasure, right?
Yeah,
so what if
dopamine equals pleasure? Yeah, let's just go with that.
So there's an objection in my mind here, and it's like, what if in a different world, like dopamine causes pain, and then that's like, but that's what we want. Like in that world, like when you stub your toe, dopamine's triggered, which causes pain, and like that's what you'd want if, like, you say you were someone trying to explain it naturalistically.
Well, okay, so in that world, dopamine causes pain. Is it what I mean? Like the way I conceptualize pain is by like equality, by an experience, right? So by that conceptualization, I don't think, like, by definition, you could want that, right? Does that make sense? The first person experience of pain, I can't imagine wanting that. It's a bad thing. It's just intrinsically bad to feel.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you there. I'm just thinking like, are these like dopamine and C fibers? Like these are like these physical structures.
Yep.
But like what if these physical structures cause like, or maybe I'm thinking like the argument assumes that like C fibers are always going to be like the things that are triggered because of pain. But what if dopamine was triggered because of something like
Oh, like what if
stubbing
we
your toe?
evolved? What if we evolved differently?
Yeah, I
Well,
think so.
I think that makes the argument stronger because not only do like the psychophysical laws have to go a certain way for for us to have like a coherent experience of the world, but now our evolution has to go the right way. Now, like, um, oh, by the way, I've been focusing on like, sorry, this is a random note because I've been focusing on like small structures like C fibers and dopamine receptors and stuff like that. But you could also do it on like a macroscopic scale of like entire brain states, like how your entire brain looks at a given moment. And that, if you run the argument that way, it gets around worries of like functionalism and stuff. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. Just throwing that in there right now. What was the question again?
See, the problem is I can't word this like cogently because I'm just like thinking about this as well squared.
This
But I'm
is a
thinking
weird argument, and like it gets you to think about things that we don't have good vocabulary for.
exactly. So I guess the best thing I could do is like sketch a scenario. Like say that
Yeah,
you're walking down the street and this is a different like world we evolve
these aren't
differently.
humans. These are like zoomins. Zoomins.
Zoomins and Zoomin Joe stubs his toe. And when he
Yep.
stubs his toe, dopamine's triggered. And this dopamine causes the sensation of pain, which then
So
causes like
that's what
avoidance.
so that's the psychophysical laws there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so in this world, the physical evolution is different, and the psychophysical laws are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so Zoom and Joe can reason. Hey, what's the probability that I would get psychophysical laws that would correlate dopamine to pain? Huh, that'd be pretty low. In fact, insanely low, now that I think about it. And so there must be a God. He could run the same argument.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
I guess
answer
that's
your
fair.
question?
No, that's fair.
Okay.
That's a great way of thinking about that. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. There are some
Yeah.
other. I could run into the main objections if you
Yeah,
want.
let's do that.
Okay, the main one, everyone brings it up: evolution. It doesn't work. If
Mm-hmm.
if you think that there, I in my script, like I'm working on a video for it, and I said in my original draft of it, I had something like, if you think that this objection makes sense, I guess you should just rewatch the video up to this point. But that's not the tone I want. Like that might sound rude. I don't want to come across as rude. That's not the tone I want to give. But this objection, it doesn't really like get at the argument. The entire thing is that the physical world doesn't impact the mental world. It basically says, hey, there's this sort of disconnect between what the physical is going to look like and what the mental is going to look like through. So evolution, that only touches what the physical world's going to look like. Evolution, like if we think of it as like this guiding force to anthropomorphize evolution, it only has its hand in the physical world. It doesn't have its hand in the mental world. And what affects the physical world has on the mental world, that's only going to be mediated by these like layers of arrows, right? And these psychophysical laws. So evolution cannot actually produce psychophysical harmony. It's impotent to do so.
So evolution, like you're gonna say then like it's not really gonna like do any work for you because there's no design in evolution towards like a physical harmony. It's more like
Right.
focused on like the physical development.
Yeah, like so evolution might be geared towards C fibers, but C fibers aren't geared towards, like C fibers don't produce pain without psychophysical laws. Evolution might be geared towards dopamine receptors when you're in a reward state. Okay, but the psychophysical laws determine that produces pleasure. So like evolution can only control these irrelevant aspects, or maybe I should say aspects that are only relevant if we get lucky with the psychophysical laws.
So what if like I'm thinking about evolution here, and like so like say you have some sort of scenario where like someone's being like mauled by a tiger.
Yep.
In one world the C fibers cause pain and it's going to cause avoidance, but like obviously they want to escape the tiger. But couldn't you say like in a different world that the C fibers cause like the feeling of pleasure, and the person just like lets them get mauled by the tiger because it feels nice. Like, wouldn't there be some sort of evolutionary advantage for like your mental states being like correlated with like the feeling of like pain over pleasure in that
Right.
scenario?
So remember, there are like 2 rows of arrows, and so what you are imagining is that the second row of arrows, so to speak, are fixed, where pain causes avoidance behavior and pleasure causes like repetition behavior, or whatever you want to call it, rewards behavior, rewarded behavior. Okay, so those scenarios are going to be equally likely as to scenarios where we have it inverted, where pain is linked to rewarded behavior and happiness is associated with avoidance behavior. So we could also have a scenario where that pain causes you to be like, I want this to happen again. And that's what your physical body does whenever it's in pain. So in that world, if the tiger eats him and he has pain and he's like, I want this to happen, and so it lets the tiger eat him, well, then that's terrible. Actually, in that scenario, evolution would select for you to feel pleasure whenever a tiger eats you, so that you're like, I want to run away physically. Does that make sense? Like, it still has to be mediated by psychophysical laws. So evolution still wouldn't select for one rather than the other.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm tracking with you here. What other like objections do you have that you'd like to talk about?
Let me just say one more thing on the last point. Basically, you give me some scenario, you tell me what evolution wants from in terms of physical states of affairs. I could give you a bajillion different sets of psychophysical laws where evolution gets what it wants, but it doesn't get psychophysical harmony. So that's why psychophysical harmony is so hard to get via evolution.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Basically, you tell me what evolution wants, what sets of physical affairs evolution is trying to get. I could give you a bajillion and one different psychophysical laws where evolution does get what it wants. It gets like survival promoting behavior, but we don't have psychophysical harmony going on. And
okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, so other objections. One is like, well, hey, this is kind of like a fine-tuning argument, right? So what about a multiverse? Well, a multiverse of psychophysical laws, you can't use the weak thought principle on that, right? Like if like for the fine-tuning argument, the standard one, you have like a billion different universes, or let's just say infinity different universes, each that are all different in terms of the physical laws governing them. And we happen to find ourselves in the universes that have physical laws, because that's just the only universes that would have observers. Did I say that right?
So
that's the way multiverse works with fine tuning. The standard fine tuning argument.
Yeah.
With psychophysical harmony, let's think of a world with there's like just duplicates of our universe, our physical universe. So the physical laws are the same, because this isn't an argument about physics. So all the physical laws are exactly the same across infinite universes, but the psychophysical laws are different. And you might say, same idea, in that multiverse of psychophysical laws, we'd expect some observers would have like, a coherent experience of reality. The problem is that you can't use the weak anthropic principle. Every other universe in this multiverse also has observers, and they are observing things. It's just their observations are all incoherent noise. So, like, you can't use the multiverse.
Yeah, so you can't use I'm just trying to like grasp this because so you can't use the multiverse because a lot of people. Why exactly? Sorry, I think I'm just struggling to grasp this, and I know it's my fault, but yeah.
Okay, and in the fine tuning with physics case, 100% of the observers in the multiverse are going to observe a fine tuned universe, right? Because they just won't exist in the universes without fine tuning. With a psychophysical case, and like you have a multiverse where the psychophysical laws are different. So in some universes, C fibers are associated with pleasure. Others, it's the color green. Others with pain. Okay, So in this multiverse, it's still a small percentage of the observers would actually be experiencing reality coherently. You'd have the vast majority, like 99.99999 and a Google 9% of them would experience chaos, noise. So you don't get the same thing in the multiverse for the physical case. In the physical case, 100% of observers experience something fine-tuned. In the psychophysical case, almost 0% of them experience something fine-tuned. So like the multiverse in the psychophysical case doesn't actually avoid fine-tuning.
Okay, actually, that's a lot more helpful. And what I mean by that, my mind can like make sense of it more. We're saying like, hey, like in a multiverse, in like a psychophysical argument, you still have most people not experiencing psychophysical harmony. So the argument, like, there is no psychophysical harmony for most observers in that case.
Yeah, and it's not like you're dead if you don't have psychophysical harmony. Like how you'd be dead if there wasn't physical fine-tuning. It just, you would be experiencing chaos. So no anthropic principle. Yes. Woo. Argument still works. Another objection is that, hey, basically the red jelly bean in a vat of different colored jelly beans that aren't red, that basically that sort of analogy, that sort of mental picture that I gave, it assumes that every jelly bean is equally likely. That's sort of what the argument's getting at. That's what the mental picture is kind of getting at. And so what I'm assuming in this argument is essentially that every set of psychophysical laws has the same epistemic probability. Maybe here's another way of putting it. With the digits of pi case, I assumed that every digit of pi had the same, for being the billionth digit of pi, I assumed every digit was equally likely. But you can't do that with psychophysical laws. You can't assume that every set of psychophysical laws is equally likely. So, like simpler sets of psychophysical laws, for example, might be more probable than unsimple sets of psychophysical laws. So then it wouldn't be like, hey, all of them are equally likely, so it's 1 divided by that 2 times b, or 2 to the power of b times n, it's some other number. Okay. Are you tracking with me with the objection?
Yeah. So basically, like the objection is like maybe like it's simpler for there just to be harmony versus like disharmony.
Yeah. The set of psychophysical laws that's simplest might have psychophysical harmony. This objection, I think, it's actually funny because it makes the argument stronger. So, simple sets of psychophysical laws would look something like, hey, every physical structure corresponds to the sensation of warm bath water. That's what Dustin Clement uses. That's a simple law. So it would be like that's a simple set of laws. So simple sets of laws like that would be given a boost once we consider simplicity. But our set of psychophysical laws, as far as we can tell, like we have no sort of understanding of an underlying simplicity to them. Like C fibers causing pain, dopamine receptors causing pleasure, so on and so forth. This all seems kind of weird and random. Like, not simple. So if you want to give, like, you want to bias the probability that in favor of simple sets of psychophysical laws, then what that does is it just makes 2 to the power of b times m. That's like the 1 over that number. 1 over 2 to the power of b times m. That's an upper bound on the probability that we would get psychophysical harmony. It just makes it makes the argument stronger once we consider like trying to bias certain sets of psychophysical laws. Okay, now the meat and potatoes argument. This is the big argument that everybody likes. Oh, before I move on, should I ask? Does that make sense? The simplicity stuff that I was saying.
Yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense because you think about our world, like the psychophysical structure where we have all these different like physical sensations, and some of them cause like pain or happiness or joy or da da da.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is like, hey, it'd be a lot simpler if everything just caused like a white
Yeah.
just, or like everything just caused pain or everything just caused pleasure. Like these
Yeah.
are all simpler views than what we experience in our world.
Or even something like, hey, negative electric charges cause sadness, and positive electric charges cause happiness. Like that'd also be a way but it's less simple. But it is still way simpler than ours. And we just go down the spectrum until we actually get something with roughly the same complexity as our laws. Well, by then we've started like penalizing psychophysical laws. Well, like all the ones we were giving probabilistic boosts are like disharmonious ones. By the time we get to ours, which are harmonious, like it's penalization in terms of probability. Okay. So now for the main argument, what about God's mind? So the basic idea here is like, hey, humans have like these complex laws governing their minds, and we need some way of explaining that. Well, then let's posit a God. Oh, doesn't he have complex laws governing his mind? So we're just kicking the can up the road. I think I understand where this argument comes from. Like popularizers of the argument, like Dustin Crummett, he has to give like an intuitive way of explaining the argument. He says something along the lines of, "Hey, aren't we lucky that the physical world and the mental world line up in such a fortuitous way?" And if you hear that sentence, you could say like, "Hey, I could change some words around in it. Isn't God's mind lucky that his what he tries to do and like what happens in the world line up in a really fortuitous way?" So like God tries to create a universe, and he has like the mental experience of thinking, I want to create a universe, and then a universe is created. Like there's some psycho-divine harmony here. Ooh. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah. Now the problem is that this is just confused. At least in my opinion, the argument from psychophysical harmony, when Dustin Crummett gives that explanation of like, hey, aren't we lucky? He's like shortening, or you might say like compressing an actual Bayesian argument. Like naturalism does not predict this, and theism does predict this. Therefore, we have evidence for theism rather than naturalism. Okay, so what's the argument from psycho-divine harmony, as I like to call it, that God's mind has complex laws? What's that supposed to be in terms of a Bayesian argument? Well, you could say theism predicts that God's mind would have these laws governing it, that where whatever he tries to do would bring about what he tries. So it predicts theism predicts psycho-divine harmony, and naturalism predicts. Well, okay, naturalism doesn't actually make a prediction about psycho-divine harmony because it doesn't include a God. So what's the Bayesian argument here? Theism predicts psycho-divine harmony. Naturalism doesn't. Well, I guess it vacuously predicts that there would be no psycho-divine harmony. There isn't an argument here. However, one person pointed out that you might try and phrase this in terms of like lowering the prior probability of theism. Like, hey, if you wanted to define God, you'd have to define a being who has psycho-divine harmony, and like that would be a really complex hypothesis. So positing God would be like relatively improbable, and so it's not a good explanation of psychophysical harmony. Does that make sense?
So you're saying like it seems more complex to think God would be psychophysically disharmonious than harmonious?
The idea is that the prior probability of theism is going to be really small because it has you have to like basically encode into it the laws that govern God's mind, and because of that, it's going to be a really improbable theory, and that's why you can't, or that's why theism doesn't, or the argument from psychophysical harmony doesn't help theism out.
Okay, so it's more about like
that's my That's my most charitable way of interpreting the argument. I think that's the best way you could run the argument from psycho-divine harmony, because just saying like, well, isn't God lucky that his mind has harmony in it? That doesn't actually like give an argument. That's not a Bayesian argument. Like, yes, my worldview theism indeed predicts that God would have a harmonious mind, and your worldview doesn't make predictions about that because of your worldview doesn't have a God. So what is the actual data that we're supposed to be updating on? Like the data with psychophysical harmony argument is that, hey, my experience of reality is coherent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the data that your argument is supposed to be updating on? And so because that's hard to make sense of, I think the best way to make sense of it is, hey, the prior probability of theism is low because you have to build in the laws that govern God's mind.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that's helpful. Do you anymore? I have one more thing I want to ask you about
I
squares.
have to respond to that argument. I haven't actually responded to the objection yet.
sorry, I'm like losing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So the first thing is that on lots of views of theism that I don't like particularly, but they're out there. God isn't a mind, or doesn't have a mind, or isn't like anywhere near a mind. Like classical theism, divine simplicity, some views of that will like have God being nothing like a mind, and so then there aren't laws governing God's mind and experiences and stuff because he doesn't have one. And I don't like those views of theism, but if they're the only way to escape this objection, I'd be fine with that. Okay, it's a view of God that I don't like as much, a theology I don't like as much, but fine. That's what this argument proves. I'll go with it. Except this argument doesn't prove that, because the laws that govern God's mind are actually going to be really simple. It's going to be things like, hey, if God intends something, that thing happens. If something is true, then God believes it. If something is good, then God desires it. Like that's going to be like those three laws are going to be all that you really need to completely describe the laws that govern God's mind, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I think this objection is. Oh yeah, and I also think that you could, like, this is the real problem I have with this argument, though. It's like, I think that you can define theism as something like a perfect being or an axiological apex, something like that, and then the fact that this being would have harmony in its mind just follows from that. You could just draw that out. So it doesn't actually, you don't have to build it into your theory. The fact that God has a harmonious mind would just fall out of your theory. So yeah, those are like the three problems I have with that argument. But looking in the comment section, people who seem to have at least like somewhat of a grasp of the argument, this seems to be the biggest hang up for them. So I hope, I want it to die, because like it seems just confused in my mind, and in its best form, it's just a really weak objection.
That's kind of what I think, and it seems like to me when I think about this argument squared and like this counter argument is being raised, like I kind of like go with where you're at with like God being a perfect being, because I think that like if you have God as a perfect being, it would make sense that like a psychophysical states like he would be harmonious, because that is perfect. That comes from the nature of a perfect being.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense to me like God states would be harmonious, and like what. Also, I'm kind of wondering like if the psychophysical harmony argument is kind of how like physical states line up with like successful mental states. So, like, I don't know if we have to have that distinction within God of physical and mental, because obviously God's not a physical being. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't find it super convincing.
It might be like God's mental states have to be like harmonious within themselves. Like God can't think like, hey, I desire creating creatures, so I'm going to kill them all. Like you can't have like irrational mental like connections between mental states like that. When he says when he thinks I desire creatures, that should be followed by something like I'm going to create creatures, or I'm going to promote their flourishing. Like so that might be it. But like, okay, yeah, I could get to that. You'd have those harmonious connections from the tenets of my theory. And even if I couldn't, if I had to build them in, it would be really easy to build them in, because the laws would be pretty simple. And even if I couldn't do any of that, I could just go with a view of theism where God isn't a mind, and boom, I still can avoid this objection. So I think this objection fails on multiple fronts.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So thanks for that. Squared. Any other objections you want to cover here? I have one more thing I want to ask you, but I can wait till we get through your stuff.
No, those are all the big ones. Yep.
So one thing that I just want to cover, and I know we've kind of talked about this, but this is kind of what's been on my mind thinking about this, is like just going back to this, like why can't something like identity theory like explain psychophysical harmony? So if you're thinking to someone that's maybe like a good old like fashioned physicalist, and they're gonna say like your physical brain state of like pain is just your mental state. Like what's the problem for them with explaining psychophysical harmony?
Okay, here's I think a good way to think about this. All I need for this argument to work is the ability to think about psychophysical laws probabilistically. And that can happen even if the things I'm talking about are identical. That's why I keep going back to water as H2O. The water and H2O can be identical, but I could still think about their identity probabilistically. So identity doesn't stop me from being able to think about things probabilistically. and thinking about things probabilistically is all I need for the argument. So even if you're an identity theorist, physicalist, all the way, the argument still works. No premise would be objected to by assuming some sort of physicalism or identity theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. And I think that thinking about it, the identity theorist would say well, maybe that still that brain state, you have that neuron which causes your state, that brain state, where you stub your toe, maybe that it's identical with your feeling of happiness. It's that there is still that's a physical harmony problem even for the identity theorist.
Yeah, a priori, prior to experimentation, water being H2O or maybe just HO, hydrogen monoxide, those would be probably roughly equal before you actually split up water into hydrogen and oxygen, even though water is H2O. And then a priori, C fibers being identical to pain and C fibers being identical to pleasure, those would be roughly equally probable before you actually observe the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, well, squared, I think that's super helpful. Yeah, anything else you want to cover here? I really appreciate your time and that amazing animation you put together. Yeah, I feel like I actually have a lot more clarity about this argument now. So this has been huge.
Yeah. One thing is that in apologetics, there's a curve that's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger curve, where it's you start to get into apologetics, and when you're a little bit into apologetics, you're wow, the case for Christianity is amazing, and nobody could ever rationally be a non-Christian because the arguments are just so overwhelming and stuff. And then you realize oh, hey, wait, no, there's actually objections to these arguments, and these issues are all really complicated. And you're oh no, is my life a lie, basically? And then you at least in my experience, you find that you dig in and it's okay, these arguments have something going for them. There was a truth to my initial impressions that these arguments were super strong. But then I find that once you get to psychophysical harmony, there's also just a giant spike upwards because this argument is just so super powerful. And I want this argument to get more popular because if that's wrong, I want to know, and if it's right, then I want everyone to know. Another thing is electrons in love. I mentioned that at the beginning, so I should probably bring some closure to that point. Basically, let's imagine let's think about the fine-tuning argument. The idea is God would want to make a universe like this one that's fine-tuned for life. That's basically what the fine-tuning argument's getting in. So it gets all the constants and the right values so that creatures like us can emerge. Well, if the psychophysical laws were different, so that brains like ours don't actually produce mental experiences, or they produce just garbage mental experiences, then fine-tuning a world like ours wouldn't be valuable for God at all, right? If the psychophysical laws weren't fortuitous for creatures like us. Does that make sense?
Sorry, repeat that. I was taking a sip of water and I was tracking with you and I lost my train of thought for a sec. Okay. Yeah.
So imagine the psychophysical laws were some way such that this universe, our universe, didn't produce conscious creatures at all. We're just walking around without any conscious experiences, or conscious experiences are just garbage and all that. Psychophysical laws like that would mean that God would have no reason to create our universe, right?
Yeah.
So then, okay, if that's true, then whether or not God would create a given universe is dependent on what psychophysical laws are true. So then the fine-tuning argument, you can't actually run it. I can't say the probability that God would create a fine-tuned universe like ours is high, because I need to first factor in that we have psychophysical laws that make universes like ours probable. So yeah. I basically, if I want to run an argument that considers psychophysical laws, then I can't really run an argument from fine-tuning. And
okay, yeah.
The objection from electrons in love is basically just the last part. You can't run an argument from fine-tuning. But I'm well, yes, but also you kill the fine-tuning argument, but like a phoenix rebirthing, except way more fiery and powerful this time, you get the argument from psychophysical harmony.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Poetic phoenix.
That makes sense, and I appreciate this, Squared. I think you've done a great job of breaking down like difficult concepts, and like really slowing it down. So I'd encourage people like go back and like re-listen to parts if you need to, because that might be super helpful for them. Yeah, that's that. Anything else, Squared, before we wrap up here?
Yes. If you're not getting something, ask me in the comments. I'll try and respond because I want to get this argument out there. Tell the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like we're on here and like we're launching it and we're launching up the hill as like we got it. It's a debate over. And the question is there something out there that's going to bring it all crashing down and then they're going to be able to build it back up, or like where are we? And that's part of the exciting part of this is just like we're like exploring this. So
or maybe we just proved theism in this video. Boom. Yeah. The mediocre
I feel
apologists.
Like I need like a really like clickbaity thumbnail to try to get like as much objections as possible.
Atheism destroyed. And then like, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, maybe something like that. Because I mean,
then Matt Dillahunty crying in the corner, something like that. There we go.
Yeah, something like that. So, well, Square, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll put a link to how people can follow you and connect with you. And yeah, awesome. That's that. Thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate you and your work and taking this time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Have a good one.
All right, have a good one, everyone, and God bless. We'll catch you next time. Be sure to follow Squared, and if you like us and want to follow us, be sure to subscribe to Hidden Apologetics, all that fun stuff. And if you value what we do, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Hidden Apologetics. All right, have a good one, and God bless everyone.